Good morning, everyone. Our today's speaker is Divya Mudappa, who is a senior scientist at Nature Conservation Foundation. Her research areas constitute of tropical ecology and applied ecological subjects, while she also studies plant-animal interactions and animal behaviors. Hornbill and small carnivores are the animal group she specializes in. After completing her MSc dissertation from Salim Ali School of Ecology, Pondicherry, on Malabar grey hornbill, she pursued her doctoral thesis on ecological and conservation of endemic and nocturnal brown palm civet of Western Ghat from Bhartihar University, Coimbatore. She also worked as a research fellow in Wildlife Institute of India, Dehradun. For protecting the ecology of the Western Ghats and her exceptional contribution to wildlife biology, she received the Wildlife Service Award in 2009 and published several peer-reviewed papers in national and international journals. Today, we have her here to improve our scientific understanding about various tropical ecosystems that we are unaware about and to help us benefit the society. With this, now I welcome Divya Mudappa Ma'am. It's a pleasure to have you here. Also, to all the participants, we are going to share a feedback form. So after Divya ma'am finishes her talk, please, we request you to fill it. Thank you. And you can go ahead.
Thank you, Madhura. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to thank Symbiosis for inviting me to give this talk. It is a great opportunity for me to share our experiences of restoring rainforests in the Annamalai Hills. In some ways, this is a continuation of the talk that many of you might have heard last week by Dr. Shankaraman. So it is complementary to each other, where while we restore rainforest fragments and try to protect the other forest in this region, we also monitor bird and other taxa. Like Mother already mentioned, I started working in the Annamalais more than 25 years ago as a master's student working on grey hornbills, and continue to monitor both the great and grey hornbills in the Annamalai Hills since then. I went on to study small carnivore brown palm civet, which is an endemic species restricted to wet evergreen forests in the Western Ghats. Fortunately, or serendipitously, all these animals that I studied also were predominantly frugivorous. So they were eating a lot of fruits of plants of rainforests, and therefore that led me on to a seed germination experiments and to assess their role as seed dispersers in this ecosystem. Meanwhile, Shankar was studying bird communities and their distribution in various landforms within this landscape. But it all started in Kalakkad Mundanturai Tiger Reserve, which is a very large stretch of relatively undisturbed forest, probably one of the best rainforests in the Western Ghats. And this is where, while we were studying ecology and conducting germination experiments, we realized that we are capable, or we would be able to germinate many rainforest species. And common knowledge goes that, it is very difficult to grow rainforest. In some sense, it is true, but it is not necessarily because... are you able to hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry, there was some...
eco kind of thing. Huh?
Yes. Yeah. So, when we started germination experiments, we did not think that we will be able to grow most of the species, but we did manage to grow them. Then it occurred to us that it is possible to grow rainforests, rainforest plants. And when we came to Annamalais, which was another part of our study, looking at how fragmentation or loss of forest had affected the diversity of mammals or birds, and we came to the Annamalais, we realized that most of these rainforest fragments were in a very degraded state. However, we were pleasantly surprised to find that many animals still survived in these fragments. And this is where we thought maybe what we had learned in KMTR can be applied in the Annamalais to kind of conserve these forest fragments for what they are worth. Next is a video where you will see a view of the Annamalai Hills as we go from relatively undisturbed forest within the Annamalai Tiger Reserve, moving on to the Valparai Plateau, which is now converted to mostly tea, coffee, and cardamom plantations. Predominantly tea, about 75% of the landscape is tea plantations. But on the left, you can see, there are vast stretches of forest still protected as Annamalai Tiger Reserve. And then you come on to the tea plantations. And although it's a large 220 square kilometers area of plantations, there are still patches of forest left in various degraded states. And some of them are quite good as well. So what you mostly see are these islands of forest in a sea of plantations. And when we surveyed these, we found that although they are isolated rainforest patches, they could still be connected to other patches of forest, even if they are degraded, through eucalyptus plantations or some other plantations, and the animals within these, and even some plants, could be quite isolated because they may not be able to move across the plantation areas. And we surveyed extensively within about 50 forest patches that we had identified in the Valparai Plateau. We, not just us, but with a whole bunch of collaborators and other students, we've surveyed for different taxa within these forest patches, starting from butterflies, amphibians, reptiles, and particular species like the otters, bats, plants. And we were very pleasantly surprised to see that many of these forest patches still hosted many endemic and endangered species. And that's when it made us realize that we need to protect these patches of forest irrespective of how small or large they are. But the fact is that they are all on private lands. And how do we do this? And why am I calling these forest patches as being degraded? So next is a short video taken from one of the documentaries made on our project, which will basically explain to you what a typical rainforest would be and what makes it so special.
The rainforest also has multiple layers in its structure. The forest floor is humid and moist and covered in leaf litter. It is under these conditions that the rainforest seeds germinate. The shrub layer above the forest floor forms the mid-story. It is composed of woody plants that provide spaces for animals that live near the forest floor. Above this is the canopy that forms the cover and has its own unique set of plants and animals. The arboreal diversity of a rainforest is dependent on this layer. The multi-tiered structure of a rainforest is very important. If this is affected, the diversity also gets affected. Our field research showed that even though there were shrubs and trees growing inside fragments, they lack the structural complexity and diversity of a rainforest.
And that's what brought us to the idea of ecological restoration. Although these fragments existed, they were in a fairly degraded state due to chronic extraction of fuel wood and other kinds of disturbances. So what exactly is ecological restoration? It is basically assisting the recovery of an ecosystem that has been degraded, damaged, or destroyed. It is not about bringing back all the components as it was prior to disturbance, but trying to put it on a path of recovery where it manages to function as a system, as a complete system with its whole set of frugivores, all the functions, plant-animal interactions, soil composition, etc., to be to kind of recover over a period of time. And for that, we kind of assist it. So our main goal of our ecological restoration in the Annamalai Hills was to conserve biodiversity. It wasn't, when we started off, it wasn't about carbon sequestration or climate change mitigation. It wasn't any of those. We realized that each of these forest patches had a lot of endemic and endangered species, and they would survive in the longer term only if these forest patches were brought back to some semblance of a functioning ecosystem. And if you could prevent further degradation of these forest patches. So, like I mentioned to you already, we have identified more than around 50 forest fragments in this landscape, ranging in size from less than a hectare to some which are about 200 to 300 hectares. And all these belong to private plantation companies. And they're scattered across the plateau, and many of them are isolated. However, even some of the forest fragments, they're not more than 6 to 7 kilometers from the edge of the Annamalai Tiger Reserve or a reserve forest. So that makes these very special because animals can move through them. They can be exchange of animal, individuals or populations across these. But this may not happen for all groups of animals because all of them may not be able to move across these plantations, such as tea. So ideally, when we started off, we wanted to have this wish map as to how the forest patches should be connected or could be connected. And we thought this would be ideal for a landscape like this. But the land does not belong to us, and we really do not have much of a choice on how forests can be brought back on land owned by someone else. So we had to have dialogues with many stakeholders, particularly the plantation companies, the forest department, which has a great presence here because of all the endangered species like the lion-tailed macaques and the elephants and leopards. And we also had to figure out, like, people were dependent on these fragments, then how is it that we can protect it, without having much more negative impact on these people. So after a lot of dialogue and back and forth, we realized that we had to make some compromises where we will not be able to establish new forests to connect to different fragments. But what we probably will have to do is improve the quality of the fragments that have been identified. And also that these fragments have to be recognized as forest patches worth conserving by both the plantation companies as well as the forest department. So what we started doing was identifying very degraded areas within these forest patches and restoring them. How did we go about restoration? How did we decide what can be here, or what needs to be planted and what should not be planted? So we had to, one, understand the ecological history of the landscape based on sources such as flora of the Annamalais. We had to do surveys within Annamalai Tiger Reserve, which we use as our benchmark sites. We also work very closely with the indigenous people here so that we learn from them as much as they learn from us in what the distributions of all these plants are, what their uses are, and what would do well in which conditions, etc., which also we learned together as we explored these forests. Secondly, we also needed to know what are the different vegetation types in the Annamalais, and which is the area that is, that falls, that these fragments fall under. So as many of you may be aware, there are low elevation rainforests in the Western Ghats, but very little of it is left. Most of it is found in Kerala. We work in the mid-elevation rainforest, which is between 700 to about 1,400 meters. We also have the transitional rainforest, which transitions into shola grasslands, but we do not work much there. So what I'm going to talk from now on will be all about mid-elevational rainforest. And once we identified what kind of rainforest this place is meant to have, that is what we started working towards, and for which we surveyed the vegetation within Annamalai Tiger Reserve. And when we plant these species, we had to not only take into account that it is a mid-elevation forest, but we also had to understand the site conditions and then decide on what are the sets of species that we can plant based on whether the site is very degraded or only moderately degraded, etc. So there are many ways of approaching restoration, and people, depending on their sites and their ability, they decide on these different aspects. One is pioneer or nurse species plantation. So what you do is you protect a site, you let the pioneer species are those species which can easily grow on degraded sites. They are fast growing species, so you allow pioneer species to grow, and which basically brings back some better conditions to the site, and then you go ahead and plant things that are typical of that vegetation type. Or you put a nurse species, basically like I mentioned earlier, rainforest, the trees are the backbone of the rainforest, and it is under the shade of the rainforest that many other species, a huge diversity of species, thrive. And so even you can use certain species as a nurse species, so as to establish canopy cover under which you can put typically shade-tolerant rainforest species and grow them. You can follow the framework species method, where you put a species such as ficus, which is, as many of you would be aware, are eaten by a whole range of birds and mammals, and you put predominantly you plant these species, which attracts a lots of frugivores, and you hope that the forest will start regenerating on its own. Then the third and slightly more difficult in some sense is the maximum diversity method. That's what we have followed, because it's almost like we did not have the patience to wait for the pioneers to come up. And so we thought we will go ahead, by skipping the successional stages, go ahead and plant as many species of rainforest trees as possible. And that is the method we followed. Of course, there are other methods where people basically manage the weed invasion and let natural regeneration take place. But the results of that is quite variable depending on the site conditions and how far away from sources of seeds you are. So next, I'm going to play you again a short video. Although we followed the maximum diversity method, most of the species that we plant are also species that attracts a lot of frugivores. And this knowledge of ours came from our studies of, say, species like the hornbills or brown palm civet. But still, we do recognize that ficus is one of the key resources within a rainforest. And here is a short video to show you that.
My personal favorite among these trees are the figs. They're the supermarkets in a forest. Many animals and birds come to feed on them, particularly hornbills. Great hornbills are excellent indicators of the quality of a rainforest. My dream was that someday we would revive a fragment to be good enough for great hornbills to start using them. It would be a sign that our restoration work was successful. Hornbills are among the best seed dispersers in the natural world. A service we could use as finding seeds for restoration was a
Yes. Annamalai again is a very special place where we do continue to have a whole suite of the seed dispersers. But when we carried out our studies within the fragments and the rainforest, we realized in many of the fragments, although we have seen hornbills, there are lots of species, typical rainforest species, that are not really regenerating and establishing. And therefore, we realize that just depending on natural seed dispersers may not work all the time, and we will have to establish a nursery of our own where we do collect as many species of rainforest tree seeds and plant and grow them, nurture them, and then put them back into the wild. And this is, as you can see, we have a nursery, which is not very big. We have about 40,000 saplings at any given point of time. We have managed to grow over 170 species of rainforest trees and lianas. And maintaining a nursery is a year-long process. Many indigenous people work with us, and they're excellent in their understanding of the species and taking care of the nursery. And I think without their support, we really would not have been able to achieve a lot of what we have managed to so far. So once again, a short video about the process in the nursery, where you'll see that we clean the seeds, the pulp of the seeds, then we clean them. And it is a lot of effort. We have 4 to 10 people working in the nursery at any given point of time. And we also have to keep segregating and selecting the right species to go into different patches. And every year, although we collect about near 50,000 to about 50 to 80,000 seeds a year, only about 10,000 plants come into a size that can be planted out into the forest. And then once we have enough plants ready, we are also selecting sites where we demarcate them and sign MOUs with the plantation companies to set aside these areas as conservation areas. And within these areas, we select sites which are most degraded, which means highly degraded with a lot of invasive species like lantana, chromalina, vedalia. Vedalia, I don't know if it's the bottom right picture, these pretty yellow flowers where almost every garden has it now, but it is an extremely invasive species, forming a huge mat. It's mostly put as ground cover, which is quite sad because in a high rainfall area like this, where we have lots of ferns and moss and everything, people scrape them out and plant this to hold the soil. When, moss and ferns and other understory plants would be doing that job naturally anyway. But we bring in plants such as these, which run wild and then they become invasive. They've taken over large areas of these forests. It's quite a challenge for us to control this particular one, but we've kind of managed to control lantana and chromalina within some of our sites. So when we clear up these patches, you can see that we clear it up with a lot of care, such that we do not disturb any naturally regenerating native species or species like Clerodendron or Macaranga, which are pioneer species which have established on their own. And under these conditions, we also, during the peak monsoon, we go ahead and plant within these sites. And we use anywhere between 50 to 80 species of trees within each site, planting up to 600 to 700 plants per hectare. But I must remind you that within a rainforest, you might find anywhere up to 150 to 180 species of trees per hectare. We are still not able to match that kind of diversity in our planting. So to give you an idea of our overall effort, we've protected about 1,000 hectares of forest across 35 fragments. We've grown over here, I've written 160, but over 180 species in our nursery. And most of the restoration has been carried out in about 17 to 18 sites. And within these, we usually plant anywhere between 0.25 hectares and 5 hectares. And in a year, we are we are able to plant about 5 to 6 hectares and not more than that. And we have raised a lot of saplings and they have been planted up. We also distribute saplings to our surrounding coffee estates, encouraging them to grow coffee under native shade rather than non-native shade trees like grevillea, like silver oak and others. So our basic intervention is weed removal with mixed native species planting. So again, quickly, I'll run you through some examples of what the sites looked like before we started our restoration work. So on the left, you see it's actually a 1 hectare patch. As you can see, it was very open and hardly any regeneration. And after 15 years, we have a lot of standing trees and in a much better shape. We continue to do some infilling planting because there are some sources of disturbance that continue, such as fuel wood collection, pole collection, some cattle grazing, but it is not so much that the forest cannot establish itself. We've also, so initially when we started the restoration work, we were planting under different kinds of conditions, and that also continues now. But with every site, we have new learnings. Like when we planted in a site which is completely open like this, we were not even sure that these rainforest species will survive because it's completely open. But we still took a chance, and we were pleasantly surprised to see that they actually survived. And in fact, it's one of the sites where we have 95% survival. Very few plants that we planted died. And today it's a nice, beautiful standing forest. And another end of it had many more pioneers coming up. And here also we planted many species of native trees by involving even local students and the tea companies. And today, again, it's a beautiful standing forest, which has been, I'm happy to say that it has been recolonized by Nilgiri langurs and giant squirrels, which otherwise we never recorded in these forest patches. Just to give you an idea, when we started this work, we had to do most of the monitoring and assessments on foot. But fortunately, nowadays we have many tools which can help us monitor recovery of forests. And you may be aware of these. There are things like Collect Earth, Restore, Google Earth itself. You can make even visual assessments of what your plots were like before you started and how it has changed over a period of time. However, we still wanted to assess and see if our restoration is a success, whether it is really making any difference at all to the landscape and the forest that we are working in. So we, even Shankar in his earlier talk where he compared the biodiversity between restored, unrestored and benchmark sites, we did similar studies on vegetation alone to look at the recovery of forests. And once again, we were happy to see that restored sites are doing better, at least in some aspects or parameters like tree densities, species richness, and carbon storage, and definitely much better than unrestored sites. However, not surprisingly, they have not matched the measures that one would see in a benchmark site. We are far from getting to be a full functional rainforest. So once again, I think what we've learned is after 20 to 22 years of our effort, we've really achieved something, but really not enough. So I think one very strong point that I would like to make is that we really need to protect the forests we have left. Whatever amount of restoration will not bring back these natural ecosystems once we lose them. It's not just forest, it's grasslands. Anything once disturbed is, you really lost a part of it. You will never get it back. So the challenges continue. One is, of course, we do not know whether these degraded sites will ever recover completely. If you ask me, although at the cost of sounding pessimistic, no, I do not think we will recover a system that is lost completely. We can only kind of push back on the speed at which these things get degraded. Many forms of disturbances continue both in the areas that we work in and in the larger landscape, like fires, tree cutting, expansion of roads. I haven't put pictures of that, or any other developmental activities. And what is much more worrying, I mean, we were very happy when UN declared this decade as a decade on ecological restoration, and we were very happy about it. But then it also makes us a bit worried because India and many other governments have become trees to things like Bond Challenge, where we are supposed to plant huge numbers of trees. And India has promised or committed to planting 26 million hectares by 2030. And this, from our experience of rainforest and how restoration and how difficult it is, we feel that what it will result is in planting trees in areas where they should not be planted, such as grasslands, and planting trees which are easy to grow, making it more monocultures or very low diverse. I wouldn't even want to call them forests, but plantations. So what it will probably help is in carbon sequestration, and that too probably not in the long term. It is another study we've conducted, which I haven't gone into here, but and most of what is happening is denotification of good forest and reserve forests in the name of compensatory afforestation. So we are losing highly diverse natural ecosystems, and they are being replaced by monoculture or very low species diverse plantations. And this is something that is worrying us no end, because this tree planting frenzy is unfortunately is not good news for biodiversity conservation. So, and many of you also would probably read once in a while how the forest cover has changed in the country. But this is to give you an example of, like on the left, you can see the tropical rainforest, you have a degraded rainforest, and you have plantations. But when you look at these aerial images, you really can't make out what they really are. They all look more or less the same. And this is what is happening in most of our reports, where even monoculture plantations or even oil palm plantations are being classified as forests. And we are showing that our forest cover is increasing, our green cover is increasing. But is that what we mean by ecological restoration? And at least from our point of view, that is not what it is. So ecological restoration just is not just about tree planting. If you plant very few species and non-native species, you not only lose biodiversity, but you also have very poor carbon storage in these monoculture plantations. If you plant the wrong species in the wrong place, also results in biodiversity loss. You're introducing many alien species which can become invasive and only degrade your natural ecosystems further. So finally, just a take-home message, we definitely need to protect whatever little is left of our natural ecosystems in their respective forms as forests or grasslands or high-altitude grasslands, riverine systems or whatever they are. We need to work very closely with local communities and state authorities and do it right. We need to set our targets with respect to benchmarks and biodiversity. In fact, benchmarks are absolutely essential because you need to have a benchmark for your nearest region. Very often people say this is native and it is native to India. And then you come and plant it in the Anamalays, or people ask us for plants say for the Nilgiris or for central India or Pune or something, saying, but it is from Western Ghats, Pune or whatever is part of Western Ghats, so why can't you give us plants? But I think we need to be aware that these, if we are just distributing plants all over the place, probably we are affecting some very unique, hopefully evolutionary processes, and also the community itself, the plant and animal communities itself. Maximum diversity native species planting is will probably help in recovering forest at a much faster rate rather than going through all the processes of succession. We definitely need to avoid monocultures. We need to avoid non-native species uh, and invasive species, definitely. But when I say non-native species, it is not necessarily only from outside of the country's geographical limits, but we should keep in mind our biogeographical regions as well. We need to pay attention and raise nurseries from within our regions and plant these species in the right places. When I mean the right places, that we do not want to be planting trees in grasslands, nor do we want to be opening up forest to create grass fodder, plantations for elephants or butterfly plant, just flowering plants to create butterfly parks within our otherwise diverse natural ecosystems. We need to, I did not go too much into detail of this. We need to collect and source our seeds locally and raise them locally. What is currently happening is that seeds from everywhere is being sold commercially in outlets, including in Amazon and other places. And this is really worrying because, like when we collect seeds for our nursery, we mostly collect them along roads or on the edges of forest bordering plantations, where the chances of these seeds to survive is very low. They either get run over by vehicles or they are weeded out. So these are the plants that we collect, and I think it is essential that we do not scour the floors of forest and collect these seeds, because then we will be eventually affecting the natural regeneration within these forests as well. Finally, I think we should keep in mind that most restoration activities should be long-term plans, and it is not something that is achievable within a year or two. And so most of our so-called restoration with short-term targets are probably not true ecological restoration efforts, but only plantation drives. I'm open to questions. Finally, I want to thank many long-term funding agencies and many individual donors who've made it possible for us to carry out this work over the last 20 years. And our local plantation planters, plantation companies like Pari Agro, Tata Coffee, Woodbriar Group, and of course, strong support of the Tamil Nadu Forest Department. And all this work is, of course, has not happened just because of me and Shankar, but we've been a huge team of people, local and a lot of researchers who join us every now and then. So all our learnings has come from a lot of collaborative and large teamwork. Thank you. I'm open to questions.
Thank you, Divya. Thank you very much. So before handing it over to all the students to go for questions, I mentioned in my mail to all my staff and faculty yesterday, and I said I am very much looking forward to this particular session because in our campus, which is 350 acres, there are fragments and there are patches of native, undisturbed, dry deciduous good forest. And we have been trying to again collect seeds from our own forest and trying to make a nursery and plant those. But somehow it's very difficult, as you mentioned, and I lose hope now and then. I get depressed, and I see somehow other plants are getting planted, and this is a long process, as you mentioned. And I will, with the help of you guys who are coming and interacting with us, somehow that hope again regenerates, and I next day I go to the office with a new hope that yeah, we can do something which we had decided in terms of especially for restoration work. Yeah. So
Yes, I think nursery is a long learning process, and it's a very long journey. And what we realized is that it can't be a target based nursery. I can't say I need 1,000 plants for next
of
planting
course,
season, so let
yeah.
me grow. It is something that goes on throughout the year. That's why we have separate people working in the nursery, because it is a full-time job. And we have to go to the forest and collect seeds from different seasons, and we have to collect it in the right season. Fortunately for rainforest species, because we are in a some kind of a seasonal environment, uh, and what water is actually the most limiting thing. So as long as we give it nurture it with a lot of water, they do germinate and grow. But I think deciduous species, I think, have a slightly different ecology, where they probably need to go through either a drying phase, or they might need some other treatments which will enhance your germination rates. So it is something you have to try. There are some recent books on treatment of deciduous forest species or dry forest species, which might be able to help you establish your nursery better.
Okay, let's see. Thank you. So yes, now floor is open for students. Rishita, students, you can unmute yourself and ask directly one by one.
Yes, ma'am. Hello, ma'am. It was a very informative session. I really enjoyed it. I want to ask, like, if it's a forest, forest fires are really common in forest. It occurs quite often. So, does it need a different process for restoration, or is it the same process? Like, how is it restored?
So yeah. So I think in areas where the forests are very widespread, you definitely need to at least protect a patch where you're planting from burning. I mean, again, I'm talking about a wet evergreen forest. I'm not too familiar with drier forest, and I've not worked in drier forest. But I suppose if forest is what is limiting regeneration, you will have to suppress fire in the areas that you want to revive. But once if you've planted the right species, and once those species grow, and if there is fire, I think most of the uh, deciduous or savanna species are tolerant to fire, mostly. And so it might be all right once the forest is established. But if it is a very degraded site and it has been degraded due to fire, you will need to control that disturbance. Otherwise, it is not possible. We had one example where it used to be a rainforest, then it got converted to eucalyptus plantations. And once they removed the eucalyptus, and they planted lemongrass. So it was a huge slope of lemongrass. And then it was given to us, and they said we could try and establish a forest. It is probably one of our biggest failures. That's the only site where we have not been able to establish a forest, because one is lemongrass. It is very aggressive. It really does not let many other things grow. And also because it has lemongrass, when those slopes are burnt, it really goes through this plot. And so we've not managed to grow any forest on that slope. Although we have made attempts to make fire lines, etc., and uprooted lemongrass, we still have not been very successful. So if fire is a major cause of the degradation or disturbance, I do not think you can revive a forest unless you control it.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am.
Hello, ma'am. First of all, it was really incredible session. Thank you so much. I have a question, like, for layman people like us, how can we contribute for restoration ecology, or if we can contribute towards restoration?
So it depends on where. If it is your own land, you can plant all the native species that are potentially good, that are supposed to naturally occur, within where the location of your land. But like if you're in campuses like yours, you can make sure that you contribute. First of all, you understand what that landscape is supposed to be and try to maintain it as naturally as possible. And of course, go and volunteer in other places where it is possible to volunteer. But if you see somebody planting a non-native species somewhere, stopping them from doing that is also your contribution towards restoration and conservation. And understanding your system and what you need to do there. It could be wetlands, it could be riverine systems, but restoration is not always about intervention. Restoration is also sometimes leaving something alone. Like if it is a grassland and then you're like, why aren't there forests here? So let me plant some trees. That's not restoration. So what we need to understand what the natural ecosystem is supposed to be in that place and try to maintain that. I don't know if I answered your question. Hope I did.
Thank you.
Hello, ma'am.
Yes.
So it was really an informative session. I really liked it. I have one question. So fragmentation often introduces a problem of man-animal conflict. So is there a problem of man-animal conflict in the Annamalai Hills? As we see, this is much more seen in Central Indian forest, but is this prominent in the Annamalai Hills and in general the Southern Indian forests?
Yes, we do have some man-animal conflict. We've started referring to it as human-wildlife interactions because, this landscape has a lot of animals, particularly elephants and tigers and leopards and sloth bears. And there is some amount of conflict. Yeah? Yeah.
Sorry. I think someone by mistake. Yeah,
so it can be much worse when the forests are fragmented, but in a landscape like this where the human densities are not so high and it is very localized, it is quite controllable. So in fact, I don't know, maybe Shilpa is aware that we have our colleague Anand and Ganesh who work here, who deal with these conflict or interactions. So, but what we have noticed is that the conflict is much lower in areas where there are forest patches, in and around areas where there are forest patches, because there is habitat for animals to use and move around. So the kind of conflict you see in North India is when people go into reserve forest to collect MFPs, right?
Yeah.
In Central. So here it is not the case. It is just that animals are moving all around the place. They are using these plantations also to move through. So what we found is that a lot of these were accidental encounters. So if, people would bump into elephants without knowing elephants are there. So what our colleagues have done is actually have a network of people informing others about elephant presence. Then people are able to avoid them. And then the conflict has come down substantially. When I mean the conflict that has come down is loss of human lives or encounters that lead to injuries. But we do also have elephants damaging buildings and houses in search of food. That is much more difficult to control. So there are different ways to deal with these interactions depending on the landscape.
Anupama KB, can you unmute yourself? Otherwise, I have to. Okay. Anupama KB, please
Raise
mute
ಮಾಡಿ
yourself.
ಅಲ್ಲಿ hand ಸರಿ ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆ ಕೇಳ್ತೀನಿ.
Okay.
ಹಿಡ್ಕೋರಿ ಒಂದು.
Sorry, Divya.
Sorry. That was my son actually.
Yeah.
No problem.
Can you
But
mute yourself?
my question is
Uh-huh.
like about the native species. Like where we'll get that species? Like for growing in indoor plants, also we can buy the native species, I guess.
Um, I don't know. Probably not. It depends on where you are. If you are in an urban area, it's probably not such a good idea to go and collect native species from reserve forest or forest to grow
Okay.
in your gardens. But if you're close to
Mhm.
rural areas or peri-urban areas, as they call it, you try to let whatever native species come up grow. So you may not have a
Okay.
beautifully manicured garden, but you'll have a wild garden that supports a lot of animals, particularly invertebrates and butterflies and things like that. But it is not
Just
a good
to
idea
attract the wasp
pressure.
and other insects to show my son.
Yeah, I mean, if you have an outdoor garden and you let some of the native species come up there on their own, which they will because many of them are bird or wind dispersed, then you will see them.
Further to this, Anupama, we are going to have a session in the October where an expert will talk about urban biodiversity and how you can attract this biodiversity, like you want to show your son or at home insects and butterflies and other part of biodiversity. What kind of plants and trees in the garden or in the balcony you can plant. So we are going to have that session soon. Yeah.
Nice.
Yes, Khushi, you can go ahead, students.
Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning.
Ma'am, I wanted to ask that are such initiatives being taken in other parts of the country like you and your team did in South India?
Yes, actually, fortunately, many places, but most restoration projects are very small in scale. Like, over 20 years, we've managed to plant about 80 to 100 hectares. So similarly, uh, restoration projects which have occurred in multiple sites in India are done in smaller areas, and that is what is possible if you want to do good ecological restoration. But there are many such examples across the country, and most of them are about 20 to 25 years old, because I think we are able to speak out about our restoration efforts only at the end of 20 or 25 years, because that's when you start seeing results.
Thank you, ma'am.
Good morning, ma'am. My question to you is that when we're talking about the rights to life, when we're talking about right to housing, etc., um, how can we actually conserve forests? We need to clear out lands to feed the population. So my question is that conservation of forest is only possible to a certain area, not to the urban areas. What I feel. What is your thought about this particular topic?
So, one of my responses might be a bit controversial. We have less than 5% of natural ecosystems left as protected areas across the country. If 95% of our land is not able to sustain the people who are there, will that 5% make too much of a difference? That is one of the thoughts that comes to my mind as a conservationist. So I think what we need to aim at use what is already converted better, and not mismanage what the resources that we have. And so I do agree that there are still very many marginalized communities close to these reserve forests and all that. But I think they remain marginalized not because there are forests, but because how they are being treated outside, and not so much because they are living next to forest. In fact, if at all they have one thing going for them, it is pure water to drink and some fresh air and some resources from these forests. It is what happens to them outside this forest is what makes them marginalized. and the pressures that all the developmental activities are putting on these little homes that they have. So I think we need to figure out how best to use the land that already has been converted for human use, and then put less pressure on whatever else is remaining, which is very, very little if you ask me.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you.
Yes, you can ask question. Once the answer gets over, you can ask immediately.
Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning.
Ma'am, I had this question that you told us that a lot of land where you worked was privately owned, and you had to set up negotiations with the owners, with the plantation owners, and all that. So, what problems did you face at that time? Because I don't think that talking with them, negotiating with them would have been an easy task. And secondly, did the government step in for that to help you?
No, yeah, it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy. Okay, the part that wasn't easy is that there is a belief that if you have forests, the government will take over your land. And therefore, the private parties did not want to recognize or identify these actual forests as forests, because if they put it as forest, they're afraid that the forest department will take possession of that land, and they do not want to lose the land. Nobody wants to lose their land. And so we had to convince them that that is not going to happen, and we will be working parallelly to impress upon the government agencies that these patches of forest are better taken care of by private parties. So that was the first challenge. The second challenge is that nobody wants to wait and see a forest regrow. So they were like, okay, will we have 10-meter tall trees next year? And we are like, no. And then they are like, okay, will these things bear fruits for us? He says, no, they will bear fruits for animals. Will they have pretty flowers? So we think that they are pretty flowers, but most people do not think they are pretty flowers, because they wanted jacaranda and delonix and spathodia and these things which have very showy flowers, because of which they have come into our country, and they wanted more of that. And then it really took us a long time to make them understand why these forest patches have to be protected as rainforests, and rainforests for conservation of biodiversity, conservation of endemic species like lion-tailed macaque, and the plants that we are going to plant are going to bear fruits for them. So yes, I think to get something started, it took us 2 years of dialogue before we could start. We kept the forest department informed about these initiatives, but we really did not take any direct support from them, because the private landowners do not want forest department to be there, because they see them more as a hindrance than support. And we had to have a balancing act between the two parties. So fortunately, we've had a very good working relationship with the forest department here. And most of the companies have, and once one company started this, then we got other partners on board. But the dialogue still continue. It is not like everything just happens. It takes us time to identify sites and get them to agree to set them aside as conservation areas and restoration sites. So yeah, it is not, there's no end point to it.
Thank you, ma'am. I had a follow-up question to this.
Yeah.
So you had to actually inform them, you had to explain to them the importance of these rainforests and how, in turn, if protected, these rainforests would actually end up profiting them, right? So if the people would have been already aware of the importance of rainforest and what profit they'd be reaping out of it, this problem would have been reduced by half at least, right? So in turn, it is the awareness that the people lack, that we lack, that we're not able to understand. And in turn, people like you have to step up and invest your time and energy to make it understand, right?
True. I think there's a disconnect. I don't think there's a lack of awareness. I think when people read them in books and say, oh, whatever forests are good for our hydrological cycles and our water table, everybody understands that. They just think that it happens somewhere else and it does not happen in our backyard. I think that's where the problem is. It's not so much lack of awareness, but it's a lack of connection with nature. And even if that is there is no reliable way to measure how beneficial it is, right? And I mean, I can say that it recharges groundwater, but people do not realize that recharging of groundwater would save them X million rupees or whatever it is. So at the end of the day, it is economics. And I think businesses will understand that better. I do not believe in putting a price on everything, as a rupee or dollar amount on everything. And that is where the challenge lies, where you make people understand the importance of these things, our environment, our forests, our natural ecosystems in a much broader sense, and not just because of how much money it gets into their balance sheets. So that is where the challenge is. And yes, I know all of us need to step up, not just me, not just some of us who are doing these kinds of projects, but everybody who is aware of it and who feels strongly about it has to step up and make a difference wherever they are. And, like my skills may not lie in creating awareness. Maybe somebody else will be better than me in creating awareness and communicating the importance of natural ecosystems and forests. And so all of us have to come together to do this. You ask me to go and plant a tree, I'll happily do it. If you go and ask me to go and talk to 10 people and convince them to save a tree, I think, I wouldn't probably do a great job of it. So somebody else who's better at it should do it.
So I guess, Divya, that's where the students, and that's why we are talking to this different kind of, varied group, because if they here are students from varied backgrounds who are studying in various programs, and they may have, more equipped knowledge about something which you and me may not have. So if convincing something, as you said, so we have management students and information technology students, so they can take it ahead that way.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I think anybody can do good for their environment if they are interested and if they actually put the effort to learn about it. So wherever you are, it doesn't matter which field, whether you're working in a multinational company or in a IT sector, wherever you are, I think you can make a difference to your environment.
Yes, right. So guys, that's for this today's or Sunday special platform is for you all, that we are meeting experts and sharpening our knowledge existing. Like Divya said, yeah, we have all have read in the books and studied in the school and colleges, but that disconnect, that is where we are taking help of Divya and Shankar and all the people to connect with that knowledge, and standing strongly on this foundation to do something, to speak up, to act. That's for what we are today. So you all are voluntarily attending these sessions today. No one has forced you, and no one is, so that's the importance, and that's the beauty of this Sunday special session. So each one of you is an important pillar of whatever work we are going to do henceforth. So good job, you guys, and thanks.
Yeah, it's amazing that so many of you joined in on a Sunday, and thank you for participating.
Excuse me, ma'am.
Okay, yeah, one by one, Rishita and Manisha. Okay.
Yes, ma'am. I really wanted to ask this. Ma'am, I have seen one of your videos called A Dream of Tree. It was a very good video. So like in that you told us about the civet poop, how you restored a forest using a civet poop. Like it was such an incredible idea. I was really surprised. So I want to know like that, how did it came to your mind that using the civet poop you can restore a forest, and was it a successful project?
Yeah, so actually, I did not restore a forest using civet scats. What I did realize is that we can grow many rainforest trees from the droppings of lots of these animals. So, as a study, I was trying to look at whether fruits that pass through the gut of civets would germinate better than fruits if I took them directly from the tree. And what I found is that it does germinate better. Then also I realize it's because they eat the ripest of fruits, they eat the most mature fruits, which is very good for forest regeneration. So what I learned is that I could grow a lot of rainforest species. If civets, I mean, I don't eat them, but I could collect these seeds. I might have a little lower germination than what I get from civet seeds, but I can still grow them over, with some effort. So that's what we did. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much, ma'am.
Hello, ma'am. Yeah.
Hi.
Good evening. Good morning, ma'am. Yes. I'm Manisha, and I take a lot of interest in these plants and all. Right from 50 years in Nasik, I had seen full of land covered with forest and lots of hills and everything. But over the 50 years, everything is constructed, and we've got Ganga River flowing that side. And that side of Ganga River, there is all completely covered with forest area. But now I want you to help us that we need to restore at least that side, that side of river, because there are a lot of yeah, we're meeting lots of cheetahs and everything coming in our areas, from that side. So even in my area, I had in my backyard, the I stay near about near Symbiosis school, and the rain water, it used to flow down and would get collected on the backyard of my house. And I was thinking of covering it with flooring. I was thinking of covering it with flooring, but I saw that the whole lot of water, it went inside where my water boring is there. And I have heard that audumber, these plants, no, they grow a lot where there is a lot of water under the soil. So many plants of audumber grow over there,
That is
and
ficus.
yeah,
Outdoor is
I've got
ficus.
yeah,
Oh,
and
ficus.
I've got two wild mangoes also. I just thrown the seeds, and they've grown so big. And the seeds, after eating, you just throw them, and they all grow into plants. I've got
Yeah.
many saplings of mangoes in my bungalow. I wanted to put it on Pandolina areas. If I can get us help from Symbiosis students when you have this tree plantation and all, I really wanted to restore on the hills of Pandolina.
So
I
yeah,
need your guidance on that.
yeah. As yes, Manisha, that's a wonderful thought. Sorry, Divya, I'm just
No, it's good that you
going.
respond to it. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a wonderful thought you are coming up, but as Divya has put it in a very scientific way, that it's not easy to restore any site. It has a long process of research, understanding that particular area, and then getting experts who understand the ecology and the previous whatever plants were there and what kind of site that it is, and then only we can go for restoration. So,
Okay.
so it has a long process, and but the thought is very good and genuine. But you have to put somewhere that thing aside when you are doing plantation in any area. Now on, we have to think 100 times before you are going to plant anything in any area. Huh? You can do nearby your home, but leaving your home and you are going somewhere else, near river, on the hilltop, on the hillock in your city. You have to think it twice, and not only think, you have to go and connect with some expert, and then only with their help you can go for plantation.
Okay.
And we can do that, Manisha. I can
Yeah.
help you for that.
Thank you very much.
So, okay, I think we have come to the end of the session. Any last one or two question we can take, otherwise we can end it here. Okay. Okay, I think we are coming to the end, Divya. It was a wonderful session.
Thank you, Shilpa.
And yes, that dream of trees is my one of the most beautiful movie. I still watch it whenever I get time, and I get transfixed with the canopy and the hornbills flying, and the movie takes you to the exact means. I'm not exaggerating, but that Avatar movie, and you feel like you are watching that movie actually. Even right now, when you showed those clips, I thought that I'm watching a few clips from Avatar. Wonderful,
Thank you.
wonderful.
Yeah, I guess.
Okay. Madhura, you can go for vote of thanks. And students, can you open your videos so our team can take few screenshots of all of us? You can smile for a second. And Madhura, you can go ahead.
So first of all, I would like to thank Shilpa ma'am for giving me this opportunity. And with that, on the behalf of entire institute, I would like to thank Divya ma'am for such an amazing session. Also, we learned about rainforest and ecological restoration, reforestation, protection of forest, which which is left, and all the endangered species we have to save, and we have to understand and then save our environment. So I live in an area, I live in Chandrapur. So we have Tadoba National Park here. So I have seen, I have visited it, I have seen people conserve it, and you do the same. Like you do that job, and we are really thankful that you do that for us, and we would like to contribute something to that. And I would also like to thank Shilpa ma'am and my fellow volunteers, Shruti Amin, for handling the social media, and Nidip Joshi for creating the posters, uh, and also the feedback form, which you all have to fill. uh, and then I just want to thank for this really nice session you have conducted, and Symbiosis University for doing so much for us and organizing this session so informative. So thank you. That's it. And also
Thank you.
I want to tell all the participants, please fill the feedback form. Don't go without it. Thank you.